just keep it super informal. I'm not going to do like big. There's no sponsors or
Yeah.
introductions or anything.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so you mentioned that you have like a testing suite or some dev tools in house that can replicate dev environments, hot modular reloading, like the whole thing. And so
Yeah.
you're surprised when some sort of new dev bug comes up. Um, how much of that can you talk about? What sort of black magic is that you got running?
Yeah, so overall, so this is talking about like we were talking about the Next code base,
Yeah.
so the Next.js framework that I lead, that my team works on. And pretty much ever since the beginning, we've been all in on end-to-end integration testing. Like we have very few unit tests, everything is integration tests.
Okay.
So reason behind that is we basically want to ensure that what you as an end user use is what we are testing against, right?
Right.
Because like otherwise you get like all these kind of like strange like edge casey bugs that are really hard to replicate and like unit testing and all that. So that's why we went all in on integration testing. So the way that this works is like in the Next code base itself, and it's all open source by the way. There's no specific like closed source software there or anything.
Yeah.
We basically have a test suite driven by Jest um,
Okay.
that is like has some utilities to basically boot up the Next.js development server or the production build or the production server using the command line. So just like process spawn, basically. And it spawns different instances of Next on different ports.
Okay.
And then the
And
test suite that we
different
ran,
versions too, or
no different versions,
okay,
so only
the latest.
the current code base that you're on,
Yeah.
basically. But we also run it in like various different configurations, like every single next config option that you have,
Oh yeah.
like various different configurations, like service rendering, static generation, like everything combined in one app, all that. But like basically where that starts is we run all our tests on top of Selenium, the
Hmm.
browser testing framework. And we use a library called WD, which is WebDriver
Yeah.
shortened in just two characters. Just this npm library that you can install to basically talk to Chrome driver and other Selenium powered browsers, right? So we test against Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer 11, which is where like most of the like, oh, you wrote new like
Right.
modern code, it breaks in IE 11, like the kind of stuff that used to come up very often. So we eventually added in testing for IE 11 as well.
Whose
And
job was
then
that? Was that yours?
I mean, someone on my team did it, but
Yeah.
it was very easy to do because like we already had the infrastructure there through
Okay.
Selenium, so it was only like add in this configuration for browser stack, and
Yeah.
then like the test runs on browser stack through like the exact same framework we already had, um,
Okay.
which is really neat because like we started out with just Chrome as like the test browser,
Right.
um, and then basically like we run the test inside of a real browser, right? Like inside of Chrome or inside of Firefox, etc. And what we do when we test, so like in case we're testing some specific feature, it's just going through that feature in the same way that a normal user would in the
Hmm.
browser. So say client-side routing, you just click a link on the page and you
Yeah.
go to this other page. And then we also verify like if that was a client-side routing instance or a server-side routing instance, right?
Right.
So say you like say we screw something up when we're working on Next itself, and suddenly like every single route transition is server-side rendered, right? So that
Okay.
means you click on a link, it does the normal browser transition instead of the client-side transition, which is
Right.
much faster and can be prefetched. we want to prevent that from happening, right? So like we have tests for that, for example.
Yeah, that'd be really hard to
One of
see
the
from like the developer's end. You might not
Yeah,
notice that at
you're
all.
never going to find that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. Okay,
um, well, you're going to find it, but generally it's too late at that point.
right.
So and then there's the other case, which like especially early, like in the early days of when we were building Next, which is currently like 3 years ago. Actually, over 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago or so. We ran into this case where you as a developer would be making changes in your app, and then we had broken hot module replacement.
Yeah,
So hot module replacement is this process of basically like you make a change and we make sure that it's immediately reflected in your app without any like browser refreshes or like basically rerunning your code in certain parts of the app.
yeah,
And this is later like superseded by fast refresh, which we built into Next.
which is so nice.
Which is basically like for people that are not familiar with it, it basically keeps the React state. It was built by Facebook internally and then like later open sourced. And Next is one of the only frameworks currently that supports it in the first class way. And like basically like that part was very like likely to break when we make any changes, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you might make a like webpack config change or like some like changes to a plugin, and it would just completely break HMR. So HMR is just short for hot module replacement, by the way.
Yeah.
So what you would get is a broken hot module replacement in your app, right? Like you're basically making changes and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. Like you can't rely on it, so you have to refresh the browser every time, right?
Right.
So what we saw a lot is like it would break and then like it would start like pretty much flip a switch in the developer's mind, being like, hey, like I can't rely on this thing, so I have to refresh, right?
Yeah, I've been there plenty of
So
times. Yeah.
yeah. So like to prevent that from happening, we basically started like creating this test suite for hot module replacement. So this is actually like it might sound really simple. Like we just make changes to the files when we have that Next server booted up. So we basically opened the browser using Selenium, WD, the library.
Mm-hmm.
And then we open that browser window, so localhost 3000, right? And inside of localhost 3000, we we have this Next instance running, and this Next instance is set to a directory. And I'm basically like using the test setup. So just in the JS tests, we read the file and make changes to it, right?
Okay.
Like hello to hello world, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then the change is committed to, well, not committed, but like it's written to the disk. And we immediately want to see that change in the browser, right? So we wait in the browser for that change to happen. If it doesn't happen, the test fails.
Right.
And we do this for tons of cases and tons of edge cases as well. So over time, like over the last 3.5 years, we've just like kept adding and adding and adding onto this like test suite for HMR, for example.
So what's like an edge case for that? Other than like imported files that, or I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so very simple cases. You throw something at the top level of a module, completely breaks the whole app generally, and then you have to recover from that. So you have to do error recovery there. You throw something inside of React component. React component breaks, you have to re-render it in some way. You make a compilation error. So you write a JSX tag that is like not close, for example.
Yeah.
Like that throws an error in the like the topmost scope when you're compiling.
And then you test the browser. You test the browser to see that the error is there, and then you test to make sure the error gets fixed when you make the change. Make another change. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly. So it's pretty simple, but we have just tons of these cases and also like the edge cases there. So say you throw an out of bound error, right? So you create a promise and it's not awaited and then it throws.
Sure.
That could be an issue somewhere. Then there's also like, oh, I like import the wrong the wrong file, right? Like I'm importing a file that doesn't exist on the disk. Like what happens there? It's like a webpack error, and that has to be handled as well.
Right.
And so like
right.
this list is like, it goes on and on of like all these edge cases. And then what we also do is like we enhance a lot of these errors that happen. So an example of that is recently I added this like parsing for webpack resolving errors. So I import something from a file that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That error, if you ever like use webpack directly, it basically says couldn't resolve ABC in this specific directory,
Right. Yeah.
Instead of like, this is the line that you're importing it from, and this is the like exact pod that you used, and just show a stack trace there. So like a stack frame where you can actually see the code that imports it, which you generally have to figure out yourself. Like you didn't even get the part where it says, hey, this is the file that you were like importing this file from, right? So we do a lot of like these enhancements as well as we run into them. So like generally like when people like, hey, this error is super unhelpful, or like it's not going to make me more productive, like we try to fix those cases as well.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's funny as a developer, like we run into errors every now and again, but you must get so many reports and so many like testing for errors. It seems like a really great idea.
Yeah.
With that many like asynchronous tests running, like how long does the test suite take to run?
Full test suite takes around, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But that's generally fine when someone opens a pull request.
Yeah.
We can run every test separately. Like if you're developing locally, you can just say like, I want to run this test suite, or I want to run that test suite through like Jest, which has this awesome regex based like splitting. So basically what you can do is you can say -t, which is like dash test, and then provide a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And that pattern could be like, oh, this is the name of the test, like exact name, and then only that one test is ran. So that really helps there, because locally you don't want to run like this full test suite, because it takes even longer than 10 minutes. Because we run everything in parallel in GitHub Actions. So we have like 6 or 7 like parallel workers running like a split of the tests.
Okay, cool. Are you a GitHub Actions expert now? Is that?
My team is. Yeah.
Your team is?
I didn't set this part up, but like if you use Circle CI, for example, like it works in the same way. They provide some tools for Jest, for example, that look at the Jest output of like how long all the tests ran, and then like they try to distribute it in a even way so that like your tests are finishing as fast as possible. Because like one of the problems when parallelizing it, like all these tests, it's not that you can say, okay, I have like 100 tests, I'm going to split them between like 4 different workers, so I'm giving everyone like 25 tests, because it could be that like the 25 tests that are in worker 1 could take 10 minutes, whereas the other ones are finishing like 1 minute, right? So they do some smart things there. We try to replicate that for GitHub Actions as well, which is in the Next repository.
I'll have to look at that sometime. There's probably like a lot of great stuff to learn from the way your team configured that.
Yeah, for sure. Like it works for pretty much every like Jest-based testing system. It's just that like we build it to our like particular needs for having tests run fast. Yeah.
Right. So those tests run with every pull request, right? And that's anytime a pull request from the public or something that comes internally. Have you seen anyone try and do some like crazy edge case pull request that you never accounted for and the test suite caught, or are there any crazy stories around that? Or
We get a lot of abuse. Well, not a lot, but like from time to time, like people try to like hack our GitHub Actions, which GitHub does a great job at like mitigating. So like
oh
generally
yeah,
it's like it's nothing basically. Like sometimes people try to run like Bitcoin miners in like a new action or something like that.
I
Um,
didn't even realize that. That's
which
the
is
first time
yeah,
I've heard of that. Huh?
um, happens from time to time. Like
Yeah.
that, it's just a thing for like open source projects. But the like basically the main thing that uh, I kind of forgot your question by answering it
Oh, just
halfway. But
crazy
oh,
pull
like the
requests.
crazy
Yeah.
stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the there are like from time to time we get really like elaborate test cases, which are like obviously like as a maintainer those are the best because like you if it's a case that was actually a bug, like you can just fix it immediately, right? um like you know exactly what to look for, like this is the problem, like we're going to fix it, right? Whereas like more often than not, like it's very vague as to like what is the actual issue, right? So like maybe someone is like, hey, my memory is running out in like this next instance, which could be like
Okay.
one of like 1,000 cases, right?
Right. Right.
So we get a lot of pull requests. Generally, they do include tests if they're like adding something new or like fixing a bug. Sometimes we have to ask for it, obviously. And overall, like what we try to do is like every pull request that lands will have tests. So either we land it and then we add tests for it, like my team does, for you, like if you're contributing, or like we ask the contributor to provide tests for them.
Yeah. Okay. Um. So do you see with like the pull requests you get and the projects you see, like when I fire up a Next.js project, I think there's a like a normal standard way of doing it, keeping using the page routing system, keeping your components in a directory, like the file structure and everything seems to be fairly intuitive. But do you feel like the community, like the Next.js community, all follows those patterns, or do you see a lot of branching out into like trying weird hierarchies and architectures and not weird, but different based on their needs, or is like the standard um, like people starting with boilerplates, does that take them all the way to the finish line on big projects, and if that makes sense?
Yeah. So overall, like the majority of what we see is that people stick with the like page directory, like setting up a separate components directory. Basically, like the fairly standard like React apps
Yeah.
approaches. What we do see is like there are approaches where like if you have a larger company, like say Trulia is using Next and they use it inside of like I can't remember how many teams, but they have many teams,
Hmm.
and their many teams are all working independently. So they don't want to like basically like the scope of a team is generally like a certain page or certain pages.
Right.
So what they do is they actually set up multiple next steps inside of like the main Trulia.com
Hmm.
website, which they call islands. In Next, this feature is called zones. And what this allows you to do is basically like create separate next steps that are then like smaller next steps that work together. Basically, like you
Oh
link from
yeah.
one next step to another. Which does do a full page transition, at least currently, which means that you don't get client-side routing. But for those cases, it's generally like it's fine because you're going to go from like one version of a dependency to another. It's like these
Yeah.
could be in different next versions as well, right?
Yeah.
So you basically get a lot of separation of concerns there. between all the teams. So like there's no single team like wanting to keep Next up to date, for example, in all those different apps. But we also see like the complete opposite, where like people build multiple Next apps on like basically like a massive Next app on like one Next instance, or like one Next project, basically. It's not per se one instance, like you could scale it up to like many instances, of course. But like that's for an example of that is like for Cell's own dashboard and like the blog, the marketing pages, everything is in one Next app.
Yeah.
And this is scaling up really nicely for us as well. So like we're basically like building everything into one single Next step.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We briefly discussed at Egghead like generating pages for every single lesson and doing like thousands of pages, and I didn't really know what sort of performance concerns there would be or how long a build would take or anything like that. But yeah, right now we're still fairly light on the routes. Is that do you see people with just thousands or tens of thousands of files in Next projects? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the forsell.com project is, for example, over 400 different routes, which is quite a lot if you like look at it from the perspective of, oh, this is a dashboard, but also like the blog, of course, but like the dashboard itself is over like 150 routes, I believe.
Wow.
And those, it's just like all these different views and all these different like settings, panels, and like all that is all different pages. So they're all code split also. So you're never like, if you go to the dashboard, you don't get like all these different pages that are like behind just the dashboard.
Right.
Which helps with code splitting, like shipping less code to the browser and all that. But we also like we also see like really large next steps emerging, like tens of thousands of components, all that. And also just like the adoption in terms of like scale of company, like we're seeing like anything from like Apple to like apple.com has now like it's running a subdomain on Next, for example.
Cool.
To like very like small websites being like 1 page, 2 pages, and that's it, right? Because the pages approach is really like scaling up for like a lot of these different approaches, because you could have many pages or you could have a few, but in terms of like the performance of that, like it's almost like unaffected, and in terms of how many pages you have, because like every page is its own, like you could almost see it as like its own like Next instance, where like it's unaffected by the rest of the app.
Yeah, it's funny now. I'm more comfortable creating a pages directory with a single index.js file in it and running Next.dev. I think it's easier to set that up as just a Hello World React app than using Create React App or any of the other like scaffolding tools. And it's crazy to me that something that's that easy to start, I love that your team has taken the zero config approach. It's something that easy to start up, can also scale to the enterprise biggest sites in the world sort of thing. Which that's really cool to me.
Yeah, for sure. So the just 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So basically, like this approach is proving to be like really working out in terms of going from like your knowledge of, oh, this is a next step, like it's a small next step. I built my personal website with it, to like going into a project that is like way larger, so like maybe hundreds of pages. Takes the same amount of effort, right? Like you know where all the routes are, you know how to create new pages, for example, and then like you can leverage all your knowledge of React that you already had, like even if you never used Next before, like it's just giving you the React components model that like you're already familiar with if you use React, and then really like the only thing that you have to like know about is the like few specific APIs that help you with like client-side routing,
Right.
injecting stuff into the head. But the nice thing about that is like you don't have to learn about like how do I set all these things up because they're all like built in, and you
Yeah.
just import the component and use the component instead of like, oh, how am I going to set up this router? How am I going to define routes?
Right.
How am I going to inject stuff into like the head of the page, which is like you have to do that in almost all
Right.
cases, right? Like
Every single
you're
site.
going
Yeah.
to inject like the OG image, like the title of the page, of course, description, all that. So those like bits that you always are going to need are like built into the framework.
Yeah.
And over like the last year or so, like we've been really focusing on like finding all these like pain points or like points where you would have to configure something in order to make it work, like CSS or SAS, and bringing that into the framework as we saw that so many people use them.
Right.
So like in terms of CSS import, so importing some kind of CSS file or CSS modules, that had like over 70% usage in Next. So pretty much everyone, well, not everyone, right? Like this 30%, which is also a really large number of people. Like those 70%, like pretty much installed Next. And then the next thing they installed was like Vercel plugin, like Vercel Next plugin CSS, right? And
Right.
then they had to set that up.
Yep.
Whereas like shipping it as part of Next has no burden on like your performance or anything if you don't use it.
Yeah.
So really like the solutions that we built are basically like you can use it if you want to, but if you don't use it, it like sort of disappears. Like similar with Start.jsx, for example,
Right.
which is the CSS and JS solution that we like have built into Next. Also like over 3 years ago. And like if you don't use Start.jsx, it's not going to be inside of your production bundle, for example.
Yeah.
So like you don't get a penalty for like using like not using this feature basically.
Right. Yeah. I much prefer that approach. I mean, it's sometimes I catch myself, I'll install or npm or yarn install React and think, okay, I'm ready to build a React app. Like, oh wait, I need React DOM. Like it's so obvious that
Yeah.
needs to be like, I mean, it makes sense to everyone who's used it, but if you think I want to build a React app and, you know, I would think all I need is React. And it's just so cool that I can just use Next, fire it up, and then all the tools I need are there. Like, so how do you keep how do you like understand the community? Like, what do you watch? Are you following the Next community on Twitter or just GitHub issues, or like how do you learn how they're using it?
Pretty much all of the above. I'm pretty much like every day I check the Next, like pretty much every tweet that
Yeah.
includes Next.js in it, like I'll see it. So like say you're streaming something or something like that, I'll see that. Then there is obviously the GitHub issues, GitHub discussions.
Yep.
So we have GitHub issues, which is for bug reports, feature requests. And then there's GitHub discussions, which allows you to ask like any sort of question to the community. And then like other people in the community will help out. Sometimes it will be us. Sometimes it's like other people that are using Next at their companies.
Yeah.
And like I'm pretty much like watching all of those. So like if something is being discussed or if something is a pain point, like we're generally aware of it. We just have to find like what is the right like approach to shipping those specific issues, shipping solutions to those issues. So that generally takes quite a bit of time as well, because like we have to do research into like what are people doing,
Right.
like what is a good approach to this? How are we not going to affect performance in a negative way at least? If we're going to affect performance in a positive way, that's always good, right?
Right. Yeah.
So like that's generally like what I focus on. So like I end up writing like a lot of proposals for new features or improvements to existing features. We try to solve like all these different bugs that come up. Generally, like these bugs are like cases that like our edge cases or like cases that we hadn't thought of. Like, oh, you're using Next in like this way with like these specific CSS frameworks or like these
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
modules. Like, and then like the combination of all this like JS modules that are being like concatenated together, it's like suddenly breaking, right?
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of those cases. But we try to solve like pretty much every one of those if possible at least. And then yeah, that's basically like our approach to it. Then we also talk to a lot of like enterprise users that reach out to us being like, hey, we're using Next at like very large Fortune 500 company or
Yeah.
like Alexa top 10K or Alexa top 100. And they're basically like, oh, we have these like we're using Next in like this team of like over 100 people, and it's working out pretty well. But we're running into like this specific issue where like we have to set up CSS, for example, every time, right? And
Hmm.
then like that basically like the interesting thing is always that this manifests in like a lot of feedback being either the same or very similar.
Sure.
So like a good example of that was CSS. So CSS was like just harder to set up and harder to get right. So eventually we shipped that inside of Next itself with the help of all the feedback that we got from the community, for example.
Yeah. Very cool.
Similar with like static generation and like pretty much like every feature that we built since I think 2 years ago or so, it's been driven by like a lot of user feedback. So not even like, oh, this is what we need for like for sale or something like that. It was mostly user feedback that helped shape all those releases.
That's very cool. Yeah, it definitely feels like it has that community influence and that you listen to the community for sure. Um, kind of on the same topic, it seems like the team has good relationships with Chrome and React and Webpack and like all the technologies you touch, and you're kind of on the bleeding edge of fast refresh, and Chrome seems to want to support what you're doing and all these things. How much communication is there between all those sorts of teams and making Next as good as it is?
Yeah, so we're basically heavily collaborating with the Google Chrome team. They have a team of, I believe, 6 to 8 people working
Hmm.
on improving Next in various ways
That's
and
awesome.
doing research and all that into performance. Also, like how to improve like performance of React apps in general. And so they're working on Next very heavily. So we have like weekly calls with them, very heavy interaction there because they're just working on it like pretty much full time.
Awesome.
Um,
That's
then
incredible.
there's um, the React team at Facebook. We have really good relationships with them. We're talking to them like very often. So we know what's coming and like how to anticipate on that.
Right.
And we're working with them on like providing a lot of feedback about server-side rendering, pre-rendering, all that. And yeah, so like those relationships are really good. Then there is also the result side of things. So like Next is being maintained by my team, which is currently 5 people, and those are all working on Next full time. And yeah, and then there's just the like general like contributors pool, which is like there's a lot of people that are contributing to Next like quite often or like provide feedback or really like great feedback on like how they're using Next and want to improve. So an example of that is HashiCorp is using Next for like all their web properties now.
Hmm.
and Jeff, which leads that team, is giving pretty big feedback on a lot of the things that we work on. So we're in touch with like a lot of like these types of users. And then there's also just like in general, like people pop up and they start contributing to Next.
Cool.
And we always try to like help them out on like landing these pull requests, providing feedback on like their requests, and all that. Yeah.
Very cool. So one last question. I know I've taken up like more than half an hour of your time. So,
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry. So with, do you feel like the in-house testing tools you have, you have all these things built to support developers and to support how it's launched in production. Like is your team, you said there's 5 people working on Next.
Yeah.
Do they get work like most of the time on future features, or making like improving it and making it faster versus like supporting old broken things? Like is that, I'm trying to figure out like how we could bring this to the community of building your own in-house testing tools can help your team focus on making your site faster, better, prettier.
Yeah.
Like is that your experience around that? Is your team mainly working on making Next cooler and better?
Yeah, for sure. Like the way that I would put it is, if we didn't have this test suite, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah.
Because like the way that I see it is that like you basically get this amount of credits with like developers.
Mm-hmm.
And like basically like every time you break something, could be as small as like a certain thing doesn't work anymore. Like this type of credits, like they go down basically, right? Until the point
Right.
where they're basically like in the negative, and like they hate the framework and they don't want to use it anymore, right?
Yep.
And obviously like building open source, like you can't make everyone happy because like the pool of people that use it is very large.
Right.
But we always try to like basically make the feature set that we have as good as it can be, with as little breaking changes as possible. So like even a major upgrade in Next is generally like just an upgrade of like some of the underlying tools,
Mm-hmm.
which can then potentially break in certain cases, but never like all cases. So an example of what you were saying is like, can your team work on like new features? But it's actually not even just new features. It's also like, can you improve existing features in a way that is
Right.
not going to break like half of your user base, right? So an example of this is fast refresh. Like fast refresh is like a completely new like HMR module basically, right?
Right.
So hot module replacement, which was just telling you like it's super like it's going to break if you don't have tests, right? So if we didn't have the tests for hot module replacement that we had when we started the project, we would have shipped a super broken experience to
Yeah.
every Next user if we were to enable like fast refresh by default.
Right.
Even if we had like I would be as bold as to like claim that if we had released it without like having all these tests, we would have probably like not caught like maybe 20% of all the cases that you would generally run into like working on Next day to day. Obviously, this didn't happen, so everything went great. We rebuilt our complete HMR system, and it just worked out. And like the old system is not even there anymore. Like we removed the code for that, so it's all using the new fast refresh system, and it works. And I'm super happy about it. Like everyone that used it is super happy about it. So like really, like if you're looking at it, like if we didn't have those tests, we couldn't have shipped this feature. We would have like had to like keep piling on the existing thing that we already had, which was reliable, but it wasn't as good as it could be. So this is really where like integration tests help a lot, because like you test the end product and not the in between of the product. Um, and yeah, my team is mostly focused on building out new features, and like obviously like there are some bugs still in the like in certain cases of like new features being added or like new behaviors being added. So in case of Next, it's not even like, oh, we're going to ship new features per se, but also new behaviors.
Yeah.
So say like in Next 9.5, we introduced redirecting of the trailing slashes. So previously, like you would have trailing slashes or non-trailing slashes. Only the non-trailing slashes worked in Next.
Okay.
And then with some workaround, you would set up with like the with trailing slashes case, like you would have to create a custom server, like set up a lot of like extra custom stuff. And basically this would cause like a lot of like hurdle for you, because like you can't deploy it anywhere, not in every case at least. And it just wasn't ideal, because like you would get like someone goes to the training slash case and they get a 404, right?
Right.
So we wanted to change this behavior from like non-training slash from training slash for that gets a 404 to training slash gets a redirect, right? And then also like people had this case where you want to enforce a training slash. And this generally wasn't because the developer was like, oh, this is a great idea, I want training slashes or anything, but more so like the previous site had already used training slashes.
Right.
So they like for like search engine optimization concerns and all that, they wanted to preserve the exact same directories, just exact same URL structure.
Right.
So like for that reason, we introduced like this incremental change, which like changed the trailing slash behavior to just redirect to the non-trailing slash. And then if you set a specific config option, you get the trailing slashes automatically. And then we like enhance on top of that, which is like if you use link, the next link component, it automatically adds this trailing slash at the end of the href, so that you don't have to handle it or like think about it at all. And then if you remove the trailing slash config option, for example, it's going to update all those links as well. So you like it basically takes a lot of work out of your hands incrementally, without you having to think about a lot of these cases.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Well, all of my integration tests right now are just basically testing that once I go to a route that a page loads. So I need to go write a lot more. You've definitely convinced me there.
Yeah, it's definitely it takes a lot of time, but if you're going to like in case of Next, for example, like this is almost 4 years of work. Next was released almost 4 years ago. So like over time, this test suite grows as your project is growing and like expanding to new features and all that. But adding in these tests is really helpful, because you're always going to catch something that you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're us at Egghead, we're really excited to like Next has been, we just did it as an experiment, like a 3-week spike to see if it'd work out, transitioning from a Rails app to a Next app. We are both very pleased with, me and Joel both working on it, very pleased with the result. So time to go write some tests, and our plan is to get it shipped by like end of the year. So really excited to see what that can do for us. All the features, edge caching, that sort of stuff is going to be amazing. So thank you from us for all that you and your team do. And very excited with Next and where it's going.
All right. Me too. I'm super excited that Egghead is adopting Next, because I told you this in DMs before, but I actually learned React on Egghead, so that was kind of fun to see.
Very cool.
Like I think 5 years ago or so. So yeah, time flies.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. I got some stuff to head out to, so I'll chat with you online sometime later.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
See ya.
Take care.